So then we are back with the modern understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Hamashiach laid waste for many centuries. As we read it in Yeshayahu the prophet, it's always important to reading and understanding the holy instructions from the Hebrew perspective, because the manuscripts were then recorded many centuries ago, and these particular manuscripts, they were obviously recorded based from the history from the holy nation and where they came from, and the exit of Mitzrayim or Egypt, and the whole set of the Torah and also the prophets, the writings, gives us during this time of the restoration period a few clues of what then Daniel the prophet guided not only his own people during the time of his service, particularly during the reign of Darius. So then Daniel was not truly a prophet of tabernacling, but he was then a prophet on behalf of the Gentiles. Mostly because if we understand the content from the Hebrew perspective, he is obviously giving clues and understandings related with the Gentiles. However, Ezekiel, the prophet, was mostly related with tabernacling, and then the third temple, and then the tabernacling coming in the future. So then, based from these holy manuscripts, what we find, very importantly, are then the times and the seasons. Now then, when we read Yeshayahu the prophet and also Daniel, what period of time the scriptures are related? What kind of a period of time, for instance, our nation is going through? And what were the consequences of those nations when came the ending of their period? What did they do? In many cases, when we find, for instance, the kingdom of Babylon, we found then that the nation fought for the power that was then granted, because the holy nation itself did not maintain a very important mitzvah. The land where they were living on, unfortunately, they did not maintain the yearly Shabbat, or every 6 years they did not the land rest on the 7th. Thus then the nation, 490 years of ownership, then they went out of the nation, so then for 70 years the land rested. Now then, not only during the time of the Babylonians, but then during the time of Darius, and later on the nation went into exile and then came back, and then you find Nehemiah, Ezra, and many other nations. They came and they were gone. Some of the nations came and they were gone. The Greco-Romans, they came and then they are gone. So there are periods of time where then nations, they come together during a period and they do what should be the best on their own eyes. Now then, ever since the Hamashiach ben Yosef came, the very divine presence that wrote and inspired those prophets that were involved with the divine, we then read sections where then the period of this country is also coming to an end. Obviously, when a person evaluates the 2,000 years spoken of in the scriptures, we can dedicate a time to evaluate these particular manuscripts, because the 1,000 years on behalf of the Hamashiach ben Yosef, or then the deliverance of the Spirit. So then people would make strong choices as far as understanding and believing and exercising and walking as per the instructions, with the help from on high, from the Holy Spirit. Now, this Spirit comes from the Holy Instructions. The Holy Spirit is synonymous of instructed and walking on a path of the divine. Now, obviously, people are not perfect, and it requires a tabernacling. Now then, in Daniel 12, we find sections where then Daniel explains that his people would go to and fro for a period of time. Now then, when a person has no clue of understanding of these holy manuscripts and how the timing and the seasons they work, then becomes a random situation, and most often is used force to get their own way. The Babylonians tried, didn't work. The Romans tried, didn't work. The Germans tried, didn't work. England, for so long, for roughly 800 years, was one of the longest. And at the end of their period, roughly a couple hundred plus years ago, they fought very bravely. Yet they could not. But they fought for it. Then it came the United States. So then the period of the 1,000 years was subdivided in a couple of sections, one of them with 800 years, and the other section with a couple hundred. Now then, Revelation explains where then this last section of the movement of the period of 1,000 years without tabernacling. Thus then the New World Order, then subdivided in 100 plus 100 plus another 8 times 100, and a couple of these was granted for this country, and 8 times was granted for Great Britain. Previously, the other 1,000 was the dispensation of Ruach HaKodashah, known as Ruach HaKodesh, or the Holy Spirit. Of course, the Holy Spirit from the manuscripts must understand the instructions. Now, a person don't have to go very far. If you remove the holy instructions, if you remove the Tanakh, the Torah, what you have left simply is a cop-out, posing as. So then when we read 2 Corinthians 11:4, we find very precisely what Shaliach Shaul was explaining. Though it was for many centuries yet ahead, the divine already had inspired him. Now then, the flow of these understandings is found in Daniel 12, Daniel 11, and during the time of the restoration period, China is given the entire reflected prophecies of Daniel 10. Truly it is a kingdom that is preparing itself for so long. And making a comparison with it during the time of Yirmiyahu, when Yirmiyahu said the Babylonians are coming, please, when they come, do not fight against them. They thought he was a traitor. People hated him so much, they wanted to destroy him. And he was thrown in a cistern with lots of mud in it. He nearly died. Later on he was rescued and he went to Mitzrayim, or Egypt. So then when people, they read translations, they try to eternize or make it eternal. And they want the forward motion always for them, and they want to make it absolutely interminable. And that's not the way the instructions are teaching. There is a period of time for every purpose under heaven. Now the purpose of this country, it's not eternizing itself. It was simply granted a couple hundred years so then they could finish the set of 1,000. Now then, it doesn't take much for a person to understand that the kingdom of the East is going to set the parameters. Now, we helped China for a very long time. During the time of the war, they were fighting very strongly against the Japanese, and our country helped them. So there is another objective that this nation should be engaged. That's helping the continent of Africa. There is absolutely no other objective other than helping Africa and organizing ourselves. At some point, China is going to lead, and we must retrieve. Now, this retrieval is what Daniel explained as a system that was despised. In a modern language, is simply a system that is weakened. It's weakened because its period of time has expired. If this nation was as strong as it was before, China would never had a chance of leading. However, Revelation is stating very strongly the system of the East. Now, we were not left without an objective. Our country must at any cost help the continent of Africa, as we are then obviously organizing our economy. At some point, China is going to order our retrieval, and then helping Africa organizing their system. They were slaves for many centuries. And since most of us were never slaves before, we can only imagine while busy in our own doings and our own pleasures, involved with our own families, and not truly concerned on behalf of those who are truly slaves. Now, it is wonderful having a family and having work, a home, being responsible, absolutely. But they were never slaves before. They don't understand what it means. Now, the continent of Africa, it is far beyond what any other nation went through for so long. They were treated as slaves ever since records were placed on paper. Now, I understand there are many nations in the East, other areas, islands, that they treat the people as slaves, true slaves. But this country, other than the Black Brothers, they were never involved with slavery. Now then, when we understand the divine from the Hebrew perspective, from where these scriptures come from, this truly is a forward motion on behalf of the African continent in the organizing of their economies. Now, our own country is going to try to fight in any way they can to get the power back. But this power is shifted. It is at the East. It's unquestionable. Now then, our objective for the moment is linking up with many governments of the African continent. And while then this nation has a monetary forward motion, though extremely weakened, this country can greatly help the continent of Africa, organizing their economy, organizing their material resources, and utilizing our money as a means of stabilization, while China then in the East dominates the market. Now, it's not truly a situation that many people would want to listen. Power is a very dangerous dynamic. In fact, power was never meant to be given to human beings. Power was meant of only becoming exercised by a divine nature. That's why this nation, every time there is power in certain areas of the world, there are always troubles, always problems, because they do not know how to utilize. So then, Daniel 11, verse number 28, explains then the system that was severely weakened because of this link with the nation beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Daniel is making a continuation of the prophecy of Yeshayahu. Chapter 1:8 of Yeshayahu links up with Daniel, the 11th, because it explains the objectives of the kingdom of the south. Now, if many people who say they have God in their lives, a lot of them, they do not even think of taking a trip in the continent of Africa. Certain parts of Nigeria, West Coast, Congo, Their lives would be transformed. But they consider themselves so important, and they consider themselves so chosen. And today we find our country in a very precarious situation because we simply don't understand the instructions as intended. So then, Daniel is giving a few clues of the steps of formation and then the ships of Kittim a bit after is related then with the layer of the military. Now trade is 28th verse. Military is then the 30th. Now these are not in sequence. You have specific sequencing when speaking of trade, you have a specific sequencing when speaking of military, and you have a specific sequencing when you understand tabernacling. Now it does not mean that this great wealth later on is linked on with then the ships of Kittim. Those are not the same layer. Now what does say very precisely is the new covenant explained by this particular layer, that we understand there is no truly new covenant. There is the maintaining of the existing covenant, but exercised during this period of time in Africa. The true faith is exercised at the moment in Africa when they obviously understand the manuscripts. So though the power of this world is being shifted back to east, the divine has left us with a very important objective. We understand how important it was for the divine to take his people out of Egypt as slaves. The African continent, for the most part, they remain as slaves. Now the meaning is very low wages, many kinds of wars, barely clean water, plantations are nearly non-existent, diseases, destruction. Now if we want a close proximity with the divine, then we must exercise what the very divine did when he rescued his people from Mitzrayim, Egypt. Now the nation has a choice. They can cling to power and get broken later, as did Babylon, as did Alexander the Great, as the Romans, even as Great Britain. Or we can understand these objectives in helping these continent organize themselves and in helping them come out of slavery, modern slavery. Now a person that was a slave can relate with it. A rich person, never. And the divine has said, remind yourselves that you were the slaves in unknown land. The divine has mentioned this many times. Because when people get rich, they put themselves in plateaus that do not exist. So as then Yajija, the king of Yashurum, the king of the holy nation, has said there is a purpose for every action under heaven. And truly our time has come. Evaluating it these last few days, China already has an exclusive signal from Earth to space, unbreakable. The system of China was launched some couple of years ago. The Arabs have dropped down the price of crude. Now the power went to the east. There is absolutely no question regarding it. But now the objective of this nation is helping this troublesome continent for so long, has gone through so many hardships. So next time I'm going to evaluate more of these in the enlightenment of Revelation. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.